Every pickleball point starts with a serve and a return. So if you want to be the best possible player, you need to know how to maximize both of these shots. One thing to keep in mind is that there's a beginner way to start the point and there's an advanced way to do it. After a certain level, it's not just about making the ball in and getting the point started. You want to do what you can to start the point with an advantage. So stay tuned and you'll learn step by step how to make that happen. Helping me today, I have my sister Kennedy and of course, Drew. Now guys, I'm going to teach you how to serve like an advanced player. The serve is the only shot in pickleball that you have full control over, so you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. But before we get into it, we need to ask ourselves, what is the goal of a serve? There's two main goals when it comes to serving. The first is to get into the point every single time, so to stay consistent with it. And the second is to try to force your opponent to hit a weak return, which makes your third shot easier. The four main elements of our serve that we use to make that happen are consistency, depth, power, and spin. Now I'm gonna go through each part of the serve and explain how they relate to these four elements. The most important aspect of this is where you aim the ball, which I'm gonna cover, but first I need to go over all things technique. So the first part of our serve that we need to think about is how we're standing and where we're standing. So there's two main types of stances that you could use on your serve. Closed stance and open stance. So essentially, closed stance is where you're standing sideways like you're on a surfboard, and open stance is where you're standing with your body open to the court and you rotate back to hit the ball. I'd say most players are better off using closed stance because it's just a more natural way to set yourself up for that forehand motion. And it also just makes it easier to line yourself up with your target. You might see a lot of pros doing open stance, but I think it's a little trickier to get the hang of. So this is how closed stance serves look, guys. She's sideways, she rotates through the ball, but she starts off like she's on a surfboard or skateboard. For reference, open stance looks like this, but the rest of the video, guys, we're gonna be demonstrating with closed stance. In terms of where you stand, it's really personal preference. A lot of players like to stand more to the left side of the box because if you're a righty, this puts you in a better position to get a forehand on your first shot after your serve. But in reality, it's really just preference. So if you like standing more in the center of the box, that's fine. I definitely wouldn't stand super far out to the side. So it's really just what you think is best for your game. But like I said, a lot of players think the left side of the box is best so you can get a forehand. Same thing applies on this side, guys. So the left side of the box would be out in this corner, but it's really just personal preference. So wherever you're comfortable, I personally just stand right in the center. The next part of our serve that we need to go over is the toss, which is arguably the most important part for consistency. So there's three main ways I see players tossing the ball on their serve. You can toss it like this. So there I just tossed it a little bit up, connect it out in front. You can connect the ball directly from your hand like this. So there I didn't toss the ball up at all. I just dropped it directly into my paddle. And then of course you can do the drop serve or the bounce serve where you actually bounce the ball, then hit it. Regardless of which toss you prefer, you can go through everything else in the video exactly the same way. All I'll say though is what you don't want to do is toss up the ball really high and then try to hit it. When you toss up the ball really high, you just make it a lot harder to hit the ball in the same spot every time. So your goal with the toss is to hit the ball in the exact same spot every single time, which should be about right here. So a little bit out in front and a little bit to the side of your body. I think if you struggle with the toss, your best bet by far is to just set the ball there and connect with the paddle. Because when you toss it, like I said, you're giving yourself the chance to screw up. When you watch high-level players or pros, they're generally gonna use this little baby toss like this, where they don't go too high, but they toss it a little bit up. But I'll say if you're just getting started, know that pros have really good tossing control, so you might be better off just setting it with your hand facing down and connecting your paddle to the ball. So another example of that looks just like this. Looks just like this. All right, guys, now we got our stance down, we got our toss down. The next part of the swing we need to cover is our take back, or how we prepare before we hit the ball. So the take back is this section of the swing. A lot of the time it starts from right here, where I take my paddle back and put it into my acceleration slot. So the acceleration slot is where I start moving my paddle forward to hit the ball. If you're just getting started, you might actually start your swing from here. But if you watch pros, you'll see that sometimes they start the swing from up here, they drop their paddle down before they get into that acceleration slot. What that does is it gives you extra momentum, which translates into more power. So before I explain what makes a good take back, let's watch Kennedy hit a few. So what you just saw is Kennedy doing what's called a loop, which is a C motion where my paddle starts here, drops down, gets into that acceleration slot, and then you start going forward. And like I said, that gives you a lot more power. So when you watch the pros, this is generally what they're gonna be doing. So if you don't do this, I encourage you to try it because it's a good way to get a lot more power. You just really need to make sure your arm is loose. It needs to function like it's a whip. If you're tight here, it kind of defeats the purpose of doing the loop. You want to be loose so you can get that momentum and your paddle's traveling really fast by the time you get to your contact point. So let's see Kennedy do that a few more times. Nice. So Kennedy starts her swing from right here. She drops the paddle back and accelerates from right here. But if you don't like the loop, guys, a lot of players start with their paddle about right here, where you can just drop straight down and then accelerate. So let's see how that looks. So all she did there was start her swing from here, which lets her paddle drop straight down, which just simplifies things a little. So what I'd do if I were you is I'd play around with these takebacks. Maybe you start here, maybe you start here. Regardless though, you just want to try your best to get that loose momentum, which translates into more power on your swing. The next part of our serve that we need to worry about is our rotation, or how we coil and uncoil to hit the ball. This is arguably the most important part of the serve for getting power. So guys, rotation on your serve is super simple. All you need to think about is as you're accelerating your paddle forward, you want to rotate your shoulders and your hips at the same time. So by the end of your serve, you should be facing directly towards the net. So you go from facing sideways to facing directly towards the net by the end.
And something that makes this rotation way easier is focusing on your feet like you're doing a golf swing. So I have my front foot pointed at a slight angle forward, and as I rotate, my back foot pivots like this and I end up on my toe.
So if both your feet are facing sideways and you keep them planted, it makes it pretty hard to rotate. I really need to strain my back, and I can't really get my hips into it. So get that front foot facing a little bit forward and come up on that back toe, and it's a lot easier to get rotation, which translates to power.
So if you do it right, it'll look something like this.
The next part of our technique that we need to worry about is spin. An important thing to keep in mind is that advanced players prefer to use topspin on most of their serves. So this is the main spin to consider if you want to be a high-level server. To get topspin, all you need to do is as you're accelerating towards the ball, be a little bit below it, and then after you hit it, be a little bit above it. This motion right here is what generates the topspin, or what makes the ball spin away from you. This is called the brush. So slow motion, it looks like this. Why topspin is good is because as you hit your serve harder and harder, the spin actually sucks the ball down, so you can go super hard without hitting the ball long. So a good topspin serve looks like this. If you want to mix it up, you can also throw in the screwball serve, which is side spin where I'm cutting like this. Looks like this. This serve stays super low and it curves a little bit like a banana to the right. Like I said though, your main focus on your serve with spin is topspin. And when you do topspin, you want to focus on getting a nice rainbow trajectory. And when I say rainbow trajectory, all I mean is that when Drew's hitting his serve, he's aiming at about 2 to 3 feet over his net. With the topspin, you can actually hit it a little higher and the spin sucks it down. So he can still go really hard at this height, which gives him more margin. And with this trajectory, when the ball bounces, it actually makes it a little bit more unpredictable for your opponent. So I don't think it's a good idea to go for line drives that are just barely going over the net because, as you just saw, that increases your chances of missing in the net. If you go for a screwball, you can aim a little bit lower. But remember, this is more of a changeup. So ideally, your default serve is a topspin serve about this high over the net. That'll give you the highest possible consistency. Now guys, we need to go over where we aim our serve, which like I said, is super important. So the number one part of hitting a good serve is hitting it nice and deep in the court. So a lot of people say you should aim for the back third of this box. Back third of the box probably starts about right here. So Kennedy, show me what a deep serve looks like. Nice, so she got it right in that back third. Important thing to keep in mind, you never want to aim for the back line because you want to give yourself what's called margin for error. So I think aiming for this back third is a safe way to get it deep. If you're aiming back here, there's a good chance you'll miss it out. So nice deep serves look like this. And don't worry, I'm going to show you how to return these deep serves in the next section. Another thing to keep in mind, guys, is that you also don't want to aim too close for the sideline. So regardless of what line we're thinking about, you should try to give yourself about a 2-foot buffer in terms of where you're aiming. It's never really worth it to aim here because then you increase your chances of missing the ball, right? And a lot of the time, it can be effective to target your opponent's backhand. So if they're righty, that'll be right about here because you don't want to go too close to that line. But if you can get your serve right there, you might force them to have to hit a backhand. So not everyone will struggle with that backhand return, but a lot of the time, you can use this type of serve to get a shorter return. And a lot of people that comment on my videos say that they like to go for short serves because they think it's a good target against players that aren't very quick. I think this could be true, but short serves can actually be slightly risky because one, you have to hit them lower over the net. And a lot of the time, if you're going for an angle, you just aren't giving yourself that much space to work with. If you're good at this serve though and it's working, by all means, you can go for it. But as you start to play higher level players, they're gonna be fast enough to get that back almost every time. And the short serve makes it a lot easier for them to get to the kitchen. The 2 bonus tips on the serve. One, you always wanna make sure when you walk up to the line, you take your time before you go into your service motion. You never want to just walk up to the line and immediately serve. Get to the line, set yourself up with that right stance we talked about, get your paddle set up, and then serve. Never rush it. And the second tip is to exhale as you're accelerating towards the ball. So you'll notice that in racket sports, tennis, pickleball, a lot of players grunt. And the reason that they do this is because it forces them to exhale as they're accelerating towards the ball. So they breathe outward as they're accelerating towards the ball. So you don't have to grunt, but every time that you hit a serve, and pretty much any shot in pickleball, you want to make sure that you're exhaling as you accelerate towards your shot. What this does is it makes your arm looser and it gives you a little bit more power. Now guys, we're gonna get into our returns, but before that, if you've liked this video so far, make sure to subscribe. We make a new video just like this every week that I guarantee will make you improve. So if you're really trying to get better, make sure to subscribe. Back to the video though. What's the goal of the return though? Our first goal on a return is to make it in every single time. So we want to try our best to have 100% consistency. The second goal is to do what we can to make our opponent's third shot more difficult. And the last goal is to get to the kitchen as quickly as we can after we hit it. Now we're going to go over the technique, footwork, and strategy to make that happen. First, we need to think about where we're standing and how we are standing. So when you're waiting for your serve, you always want to be in a good ready position with a nice wide base, just like Kennedy is here. And in terms of where you are, I think it's best to be a little bit more out to the side, because this puts you in the best position to react to any type of serve that your opponent hits. So if they hit an angle serve, close enough to that, and if they go more towards the middle, you can still get that serve as well. And an important thing to keep in mind, you don't want to stand too close to the baseline, especially if your opponent's hitting hard. So I see so many players that are right up on the baseline like this. And what that does is if your opponent hits a deep serve, it makes it pretty much impossible to get a good contact point. I hit that right at the height of my foot there, right? I was really having to bend over to get that serve. So ideally, your base is about 2 feet behind the line like Kennedy is here. And if your opponents are hitting really hard, you can even back up more and give yourself that extra space. Because if they're hitting hard, you want to give yourself more time so that you can prepare for a better return. And with this stance, you always want to make sure when you're returning, you're moving forward as you're hitting the ball, okay? So what I don't want to do is just get right here, stand here, hit the ball, then run forward, right? Because we know we want to get to the kitchen. You always want to be running forward as you're hitting the ball like this. See how I sort of ran through that shot? So the way that you do that, get set in this position, and as your opponent is about to hit the ball, you start leaning in a little bit so that by the time the ball gets there, you're moving forward through it. And why you want to start back farther on the harder serves is that if they're going really deep, you want to give yourself that space so that you can still run forward through that ball. So by standing back here, I can move forward a little bit on the hard serve before I hit it, even though it's going really deep in the court. And when we think about our technique, there's 2 main things that you want to keep in mind. The first is that you're using a super compact motion, so you don't want to be taking a really big backswing here. Most of your swings actually going to take place in front of your body. And the second is that you should have a firmer wrist. So you don't want to be squeezing it as tight as you can, but you shouldn't be super loose. You want to have a little bit firm. So a forehand return should look like this. Very, very compact swing. And a backhand return should look like this. Something really important to keep in mind is that most high-level players do what's called the chip in charge, which is where they're essentially coming under the ball, getting a little bit of slice on the return. And what that does is when you use slice, it actually keeps the ball in the air longer, which gives you more time to get to the kitchen. So most players use the chip in charge. Let me show you how that looks again. So I'm just putting a little bit of slice on the ball when I'm using that really compact bunting motion. If you don't know how to use slice yet, don't worry. It's totally fine to use whatever spin you want in the return. What's important though is that you're using a compact motion and coming from right behind the ball. But now we need to think about where we're aiming the return. So just like on our serve, the most important aspect of aiming our return is getting the ball deep. So I think a good idea is to aim for the back third of this box, just like we do on our serve. All right, so let's see some examples of good returns. So you see there, I hit a pretty deep serve. Kennedy still though, because she had that space because she started farther back, was able to move forward through it. Ball bounced about right here, which is still pretty deep. So it's a pretty good one. See another one. Nice. Another deep serve again. She had that space though, so she was able to move forward through the ball and get it nice and deep. An important thing to keep in mind is that power isn't necessarily that important, because if you hit it too hard, you actually give yourself less time to move in and get to the kitchen. I think in terms of how high we're going over the net, we can go similar to our serve, about 2 to 3 feet over the net, because height actually gives you more depth. So power plus height is what equals depth, right? And because you don't want to hit super hard, a little bit floatier, higher returns can actually be super effective. Let's see a few more. Nice. Right in the middle of that box, pretty deep. The main thing you want to avoid on your return, guys, is hitting it short. And let's see why. So when Kennedy went super short on that return there, I'm literally hitting the ball from right behind the kitchen. So all I have to do to get to the kitchen is take a few steps in. On a deep return, I have to let the ball bounce, right? So I'll be hitting my third shot from way back here. So to get to the kitchen, I have to take way more steps, which is a lot harder and gives Kennedy more of an advantage. Some other good targets, guys, in terms of where you can specifically aim on the court are 1, down the middle. By going down the middle, you give yourself a very low chance of missing the ball off to the side. So it just increases your consistency. Also, when you go down the middle, you can confuse your opponents as to who should take the third shot. Another good target is to just go for the player who has the weaker third shot. Now, guys, we're gonna go over some examples of both the serve and the return together. So there, Drew went pretty deep. Drew actually has a really hard serve, and Kennedy was standing really close to that back line, the baseline. So she didn't give herself much space to move forward, which made it tough for her to make that return in. So there, Kennedy gave herself more space. Drew hit a really similar serve. It was actually even deeper, but because Kennedy started farther back, she could move through her return, and that made it a lot easier for her to get a good return, which she took down the middle. So there, Drew's serve was a little bit shorter, which made Kennedy's return so much easier. And as you saw, she got it super deep right down the middle, which made it tough for him. There, Kennedy hit a super short return, which made Drew's third shot really easy, and he got right to the kitchen. It was on a level playing field. Half the time though, guys, your partner's the one serving or returning, so make sure to send them this video. But after these 2 shots, you need to know how to dominate the kitchen with volleys. In this next video, I go over exactly how to do that.